I thought it would be useful to begin by telling you guys about the design process, so how you even decide what materials to use for a job like this. First, I start by seeing what's already been done and how. I'll find things that I like, from different techniques through to different placements of makeup, and I'll know what I want to incorporate from others' makeups into my own. I'll also find things that I immediately rule out because it doesn't look as good as I want it to, or because it's unsafe. So when I first started researching, there were a handful of tutorials on YouTube and on Instructables, and the majority of them used a material used for insulating houses, which is a spray polyurethane expanding foam. Several professional artists told me this isn't a safe product to use. It's not a makeup product. It releases poisonous gases while you're mixing it, and it's not safe to have against your skin. So I ruled that out. One suggested that a safer alternative would be to use styrofoam blocks and just carve those out until you get the shape that you wanted. Although, to borrow a quote from a friend, when corners are cut sufficiently, the square becomes a circle. There was a person on Instructables called Corridor, and they used styrodor boards and carved them up and then covered it in Warbler. He also added lights to it, and the end result looked pretty neat, but I don't feel like I could pull off using that process. I really like the way that he sculpted it to sit as a half mask on here, and then he had the teeth sitting on top of the upper lip, which is something that I hadn't seen before. I think it's uniquely his design, and I thought it was super cool. So that element of the makeup I got from him. Another makeup that I found that looked amazing was by Francesco Sanseverino, and he made a full silicone mask, but that process was going to be a bit too expensive for my budget. He used cotton fibers on the skin to get that moldy, fluffy look, and he used silicone to adhere them, which I think is genius. So I used that technique from him, although I used gelatin instead of silicone just to make it a bit cheaper. Gelatin is going to be a little bit stickier, but just mostly on the joints, otherwise it was fine. So I got the mask placement and the teeth idea from Corridor, and I got the cotton fibers idea from Francesco, and for my main reference images for the sculpt, I found a really nice clicker bust sculpted by Fabricio Works. I found out after I made it all that he actually has a video of him sculpting it too, which would have been so useful to have seen before I tried, but I'll link that in my description box, as well as my album of reference images and inspo material. So for me, the best thing to suit my needs, to have something be highly realistic, have something be safe, and have something be comfortable enough to wear all day at a con, I decided to go with sculpting and molding. I decided to run it in latex as it is light and cheap. It's a pity that we don't have foam latex ovens here in Perth, because that would have been a really good material for this. So my two professional mold making friends thought it would be best to have a latex skin and then a soft foam on the inside. Using the foam in the center helps it to keep its shape and so that it connects with my face while I'm wearing it. It's also very light, and it has its own safety requirements, which I'll get into in the casting video. Now onto sculpting. I had to make a full head cast of myself. I had two professional makeup artist friends who have experience doing this come over and help me take a silicone life cast of my entire head. I then filled it with a strong plaster and attached some bolts into the bottom to attach it to a board for sculpting. If you want a head cast but don't have professional makeup artist friends like I do to help you do it, I would personally commission someone who is qualified and experienced to cast your head for you, as there are inherent risks with life casting, including suffocating to death, so be careful and leave it to a professional. I used monster clay for this for the first time, and it was amazing. I heated up the whole tub in the microwave on low heat for I think around 4 minutes. Each microwave is different, and it made it the soft, almost fondant-like texture, so I could scoop up big piles of it and load it onto the sculpt. So I started by doing just that, placing a layer of clay where I wanted my sculpt to be. Then I started building up those basic disc shapes and adding in that split down the lips, curving around to the left side of the face. I roughly placed some individual resin teeth in the sculpt as a point of reference, and then started adding sausages of clay for where I wanted those sculpted discs to undulate. Then I started adding these sausages to the edges of the discs to create that coral-ish texture of growth outwards away from my face. I started adding smaller and smaller sausages to these pieces, so it'd be kind of like a tree branch, starting out wide and then getting smaller and smaller branches off it. I flattened out one half of the face because I thought I'd lost some of that disc quality. Then I continued adding these smaller sausages of clay all around the back of the sculpt, looking at the sculpt from behind so that all angles would look decent while wearing it. Then I went in and detailed the teeth. I ended up redoing the teeth, so it's not worth it for me to tell you right now what I'm doing. I added a bit more clay above it to make it look more recessed. I started working on the left side, smoothing it out so that the pieces all look like they're part of the same organism, and then putting some more subtle undulations in the disc. I also added some more little bumps in the bottom corner. Then I smoothed out and redid the right side until I was happy with it. You can see me using a hairdryer on low heat to help melt and smooth out the clay, which is something I really like about Monster Clay. Its low melting point and its elasticity. At this point, I thought it had become too lumpy and there was just too much going on, so I started softening the clay with a hairdryer and then using sculpting tools and my fingers to try and smooth out some of the lumps and get it back to some more solid, larger shapes that are unified. I took the teeth out and realized that I needed a different angle on the teeth. They needed to be jutting out a lot more from my real teeth as the skull is bursting open with the fungus, so it makes sense that the teeth got pushed out in that split. So I bulked out that part and brought it forward. The misaligned teeth made the split look even more prominent, so I went with that. Then I went back to smoothing together some more of the pieces around the side and the back. backs to the teeth, I added these little sausages on the gum line and smoothed those out. I sculpted a raised bump along the top of each tooth in the gum line to simulate where the underlying bone or tooth root would be protruding. Then I went in with some naphtha, which is a lighter fluid which helps to melt the clay. I've really only just been getting an idea of just how nasty this stuff can be. I was told it's now banned in California, so always check the MSDS sheets on what you're using. This stuff needs to be used with gloves, proper ventilation. If you're using a lot of it, a respirator is needed. Wear glasses to protect your eyes, etc. But don't just trust me, do your own research into a product before you use it for yourself, just to be super sure. So I use this to melt the clay around the gum area to make it smoother. Then I went to the back of the sculpt and smoothed it out some more. You can see I take a lot of gaps from working on areas and come back to them later and then decide to do more or decide if I'm happy with them. It's good to take a step back. Now to finish up, I wanted to refine and smooth the surface, and there's two ways that I did this. Firstly, I used my hairdryer on a low heat to soften and melt the surface of the clay, which gets it really glossy. But some of the bumps and kinks in the sculpt would melt too much before being smoothed out by this process. So the second step I took was using some more naphtha to help melt down the surface and smooth it out with a brush. Now I'm working inside, but it would be best to use this stuff outside with a lot of airflow and with a full respirator, as the fumes are heavy and are not that great for you to be breathing in. I continued this process over the whole sculpt. Once that refining process was done, I added a couple of little veins across the face. These are little thin sausages of clay, blended just on the outer edge and then blow dried and melted a little, so they look as though they're part of the sculpt and not just on top of it. Then I quickly blow dried the rest of the sculpt to make it look glossy, and the sculpting process was complete. The next step is the molding video, and when it's uploaded, it will be clickable here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.